Once again, Dara and I have got the solve from a chip race hand review. We're going to go through it in detail for all the solver nerds out there. Brought to you by simplifypoker.com. I should have said that at the start. This is a hand between David Lappin and Anže Šmajd. Anže went on to come eighth in the World Poker Tour championship event, but busted David along the way. It's better if you listen to the hand review first, I would say, Dara, for anyone that's watching this first. So if you are watching this first, perhaps go and listen to the latest episode of the chip race. Anže was unknown to David, but this is his Hendon mob, and he's been somewhat of a very active player over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, he basically, it looks like he started playing around 2018. He's from Slovenia, and all of his early results are in Slovenia. Or sorry, actually, they're not. Some of them are in Rosvedov as well. But he didn't play a ton, it looks like, live before the pandemic. But then he starts popping up at EPT stops and in the Win and Venetian Deep Stacks. So David thought he was French at the time.
Right.
And David thinks most people are French. Not only did he knock out David, he also knocked out Jamie Costetter. David said he came to the table. David immediately clocked him as probably a very good online player. And he was being super aggressive, three betting a lot, opening a lot. And that actually played very heavily into the way this hand played out. David's perception of him as somebody who might be getting out of line. So to the hand in question, David opens, it folds around to David. He's on the button and he's got king four of spades, and he has 37, 38 big blinds, something like that. So obviously he opens, even though it's the chip leader. The chip leader, he said, had something like 300 big blinds. He had an absolutely massive stack at this point,
Okay.
which obviously powered him all the way to eighth for his best ever live cash of 400,000. So he defends. And the flop comes ace 10 4 with one spade, the 10 of spades.
Yeah.
So David has a bottom pair, best possible kicker, and he has some backdoors as well. He can hit a straight with queen jack, and he can hit obviously a flush if it comes to spade. As anybody who's studied these types of boards, ace high boards are almost always range bets.
Sure. Yeah.
Now I ran the solve for ICM. There was actually about 60% of the field left, but I used the GTO wizard 75% setting left rather than 50%. The reason for this is at the WPT, only 12.5% of the field are paid, not 15%.
Right. Yeah.
So 75% means 1 in 6 are paid. So that seemed the best way to do it. So obviously the big blind is never going to have any leads. He's going to purely range check. And David is, range check. And David is supposed to just range bet.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, the solver uses a small size, 25%. Now, this is the point where David kind of gets a little bit spooked. He's thinking about, well, the guy's very aggressive. I have bottom pair. I have backdoors. I really don't want to get check raised though with my bottom pair. So he decided to take street out and check. But we can see the solver really doesn't like that. And there's quite a significant difference in EV between betting and checking.
Yeah. I mean, king four suited particularly, I would say, Dara, because this is a great merge bet, right? It's
I mean, it's going to clear out a lot of equity. Like, let's look at the response to the bet. Opponent is supposed to fold half the time, so half the time we just win the pot now, which is obviously very good. He's not actually supposed to do too much raising on this board, because it's not a good board for him. Nothing to stop David from having a much stronger hand than king four. David can have aces, tens. These are hands that his opponent doesn't have. So yeah, But I do see players make this mistake time and time again. They're up against aggressive players. They have a hand that don't want to get check raised, so they check. But guess what? What's just happened now? They've just told the guy, I didn't want to get check raised.
Mhm.
Okay, David might be protecting his range slightly with some very strong hands like sets, etc. But you're going to have a four or a 10 far more often than you're going to have pocket aces or pocket tens. So
Mhm.
it's not really that much protection. So obviously we can't go any further now because David did check.
Yeah.
So what we did for the chip raise piece is we node locked, and these are the hands that David is going to check back. It's mostly his 10x and his 4x that doesn't want to get check raised. Um,
Right.
we threw in some other stuff as well that maybe he just gives up with,
Mhm.
like Queen Five suited kind of has nebulous backdoors as well, just so that it's not always a 10 or a 4, and uh, aces and tens kind of to protect an ace 10 to protect
Yeah.
the range, so that some very strong hands are there. Okay, so let's see. The eight of spades rolls off on the turn, so David picks up a flush draw.
Hmm.
Uh, However, much to his shock and dismay, his opponent led out with an overbet, one and a
Right.
half times the pot. So I believe I ran another node lock sim for that. See if I can find it. Um, this one. Yeah. So the opponent leads for 1.5 times pot. Now, it turns out this isn't really a thing. If his opponent is playing GTO, he's supposed to just check the turn as well.
Sure.
Because David still has some very strong hands in his range. But when we when we when we find out when we hear what his opponent actually had, it kind of makes sense. His opponent has ace four,
Hmm.
so he has top and bottom pair.
Yeah.
He recognizes in game that David is trying to get to showdown cheaply. So guess
Mhm.
what he does? He's like, well, that's not happening. I'm going to have one and a half times pot, give you a really hard decision now. You might get spooked and you might feel you're being pushed around, especially when you have a young aggro guy with a kind of image of like he's pushing people around. It just puts David in a very difficult spot. So we had to node lock to allow him to do this to see what the response should be.
Mm.
Um, and the response with King Four of Spades is pretty much just to call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And
and
Dara, could you just go back one? I'm just confused
yeah,
about something.
yeah.
I mean the leading out for 1.5 times pot. It happens 0.1% of the time in this node lock.
Oh,
Is
sorry.
that the
Yeah,
right?
I didn't actually node lock because we obviously don't know what his range is. We just know he has ace four, but there is a sliver of leading.
But
Uh,
does this mean that everything after this node is correct from the solver's perspective? The fact
yeah,
that it's such a
yeah,
low
because
free. Okay, cool.
because it's in there at least some of the time. It means
There is a
strong
response to it that's
probability.
accurate.
And the
Right.
solver is giving him a balanced range. Like it's not
Yeah.
always two pairs.
Sure.
It can be other stuff. You can see that the solver still thinks that checking has more EV.
Yeah.
Um, but if we look at the response to check, like David is supposed to start betting now at King Four, and again, I don't think David would. I think David would just be even happier to check now
Hmm.
because so I think his opponent recognizing game, David is trying to get to showdown cheaply.
Yeah.
And he's probably not going to bet again if I check.
Hmm.
And I definitely want to bet and I want to get as much money in as possible to set up a river shove.
Hmm.
So his opponent leads out. Now, if we look at King Four of Spades, um, when David asked me about this hand in game, David was, or shortly afterwards, David was fairly adamant that the shove was best. He was focused on folding out equity. He was convinced
Hmm.
his opponent had lots and lots of bluffs, and he wanted to fold that all, but they all had equity, like gut
Hmm.
shots and stuff,
Yeah.
or flush draws. So, but, and I said to him, well, I think the shove is probably profitable, but I
Yes.
don't think it's the most profitable play.
Hmm.
And the solver's bearing this out. You can see the call makes 5.98 and the shove only makes 1.96. So there's quite a
Yeah.
significant difference. They're both positive. They're both better than folding. Um, but yeah, it's significantly worse. Now, of course, you can understand why a human like David would take this action because he's afraid of what's coming on the river.
Hmm.
He thinks, well, if I just call and a blank rolls off on the river like the six of clubs or something, and he shoves, what do I do then?
Hmm.
So let's have a look if we do call and say the six of clubs rolls off, and our opponent is going to shove a lot, obviously,
Hmm.
and we just fold. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's fine because we kind of just recognize, look, I'm at the bottom of my range. I have better hands
Hmm.
that I can call with. I have some two pairs. 10-8 and 10-6 turned into two pairs. I even 10-7 is a better call. It's further up the range than just bottom pair. Um, so we have a lot of better calls. It's often when we're playing against aggressive players, we think we're getting exploited when we're folding anything to them. But
Yeah.
it's fine to fold the bottom portion of your range. When if he moves all in on the river for just over pot, uh, we only have to call half the time for him not to be exploiting us.
Hmm.
And King Four suited is clearly in the bottom half of our range, so it's fine to fold it.
Hmm. So go back to the shove to David's shove over the top
Yeah.
because I'm very curious to see what he makes folds. Oh, it's difficult to see actually because
It's
of the
difficult to see here, but you can see basically he will occasionally, very occasionally, get top pair to fold,
yeah.
uh, but but top pair mostly calls. So that
Hmm.
he can get some top pairs, some weak aces, I guess, to fold. Um, the before moving on to that, David was focused on like a blank river as well, like a
Hmm.
six of clubs. But obviously, there's better rivers for us. For example, we could hit our flush.
Hmm.
If the two of spades comes in, what's going to happen? Well, he's going to make a big bet, almost all in, 80%
Yeah.
of the time. So we're getting paid off when we hit. We could hit a king, um, and on a king, he's going to move all in 40% of the time, and we're going to be good mostly. Not
What
in this
happens on a
case, as it happens, because he unfortunately our opponent has ace four. But
what happens on a four out of interest? I think that's possible. That's the best card for Lappin, surely.
yeah, on a four, his opponent will use
Mm.
the 67% size a lot,
Mm.
and then we just move all in and try and get
Yeah.
called by his worst two pair and worst one
Yeah.
pairs. Um, yeah, so I think like Lappin's thought in game was very human, and it was sort of motivated by not wanting to face difficult decisions, and
Hmm.
that's why he checked the flop because he didn't want to have face a difficult decision if he got check raised. But first of all, you're not going to get check raised too often, and secondly,
Hmm.
just because you check the flop doesn't mean you're not going to avoid a difficult decision, as he very quickly found out when his
Mm.
opponent shoved 1.5 times pot in on the turn.
I
Um,
think, yeah, I think one of the big takeaways for anyone watching this is to just recognize when an opponent caps himself in this particular way. Um, like and a classic one would be to if they're the pre-flop raiser and they check back on an ace high flop. That's um, very much a way that the players cap themselves. For example, it's often a sign of say someone having kings or something on an ace high flop or so
yeah,
on.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So let's look at how the hand should have played out. Uh, David is supposed to range bet
yep.
25%. The small size is fine. And with ace four, there's mixing. His opponent can raise or his opponent can call. Given how
Hmm.
aggressive his opponent was, I suspect he would
Yeah,
have
you'd
raised.
think he'd raise. Yeah.
Yeah. And then David has a very clear call.
Hmm.
It's much better than all the other options. And then on the eight of spades, what does ace four do? Mostly bets. So I suspect that's what his opponent would have done.
Yep.
And
Purely pure kill, surely. for
Pure
Lappin
call.
even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We're in the same spot. We have a bluff catcher, which can improve. And then say on a blank river, ace four finds its way into actually on a in this node, the opponent doesn't use the big bet as much, doesn't shove because he hasn't really polarized himself.
No.
And when a blank river comes, he's going to have a lot of stuff like ace nine, for example, that's going to want to bet. Uh, oh, sorry, no. Of course, at this stage, this is all in, even though it's only 43%.
Mhm.
And with king four, we call sometimes fold, sometimes mostly fold.
Mhm.
Um, so folding is, I think folding would be the best play, unless you're
Yeah.
convinced your opponent is bluffing on this specific occasion or over bluffing in general.
Mhm.
Um, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, there was another node lock I did when I ran this when I node locked the flop initially and had to go check check and put the eight of spades up. The solver just wants to range check the eight of spades because it's not a particularly good card for us
Mhm.
as the defender. Um, there's a small amount of betting at 25% pot. That's the size it uses if it does bet. So I
Mm.
had to node lock it to, or I had to edit it to allow the overbet. However, when we do add the overbet, um, ace four does get into into the overbet range some of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's obviously a
That
legitimate.
that makes sense. Ace four is a quote unquote strong but vulnerable hand in that it can get counterfeited and stop being
Yeah,
such a strong hand straight away. So it makes sense as an overbet hand.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's basically the solve. Anytime you're looking at a hand like this, I think like in the old days when we were using something like GTO Wizard, and we kind of had no option. For first of all, we couldn't really adjust for ICM. We were just looking at standard solves, but people tended to just line check and go, okay, well, I went check, check. Oh, okay. Well, I shouldn't have checked. So that's the end of that. But when you're doing your own investigation, node lock for either your own range or your opponent's range, and see what you can take from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And very good of Lappin to put himself on the block like this because
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's I have a dual kind of response to this because in GTO world, I know exactly that this was a C bet. In fact, I enjoy making this hand as a C bet just because it's got so many possibilities on later streets. But with the read that David said, I must admit, I think I probably play the hand the same way as he did.
Yeah.
Simply because I do also have this fear of the young aggressive player. And every time, and we did this a lot in the Beyond GTO book, which is all about exploitative poker, every time the response seemingly is to not let your own foot off the grass, off the gas,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Fight fire with fire.
let them make the mistake that they're going to make. And if you have to fold your hands early, it's just one of the ones in part of the bottom of the range that you've got to fold early.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about making mistakes, but that was based on frequencies and stuff. David hadn't really seen Showdown, so he had no
Mhm.
real proof that the guy was stepping out of line. He just thought he was because of his frequencies.
Mm.
And often, when a guy sits down and he looks like the opponent did in this case, people can think he's always at it, but maybe he just had a lot of hands.
Mhm.
He had it on this occasion. Um, and David made a very good point afterwards too. He said that like he was trying to avoid playing a big pop with the guy, but realized afterwards he couldn't avoid that. And
Mm.
the response to playing against somebody you believe to be very, very good and very, very aggressive is not to diverge, because
No, no, it's
now you're into a murky part of the game tree where he's probably going to do better than you.
yeah, yeah. Not sorry to end on such a shameless plug, but you and I have just recorded a video for our post-flop ICM course, and it was about what to do when you're at a final table with some amateurs and some very, very good players. And the 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 general takeaway was against the very, very good players, low variance, keep the pot as small as possible. Take a GTO line that isn't going to involve putting that many chips in the pot, precisely for reasons like this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But when it's a range bet, you got a range bet.
Yeah, exactly.
For more free content like this, including some free courses, free videos, and a free ebook on how to study, go to simplifypoker.com/free.